YouTube, Antics here with the swole on, the fro on, and if you need the explainer, I am the Alpha Tamer, and today I have the best treat for you guys. This gentleman has been on my channel before. They've topped with a red deck before, but I guarantee no one saw this coming. Will you please introduce yourself?
What's going on, guys? My name is Dash. I go by Hyomin on Discord and in some Digimon circles. And today I have a very exciting second place Phoenixmon list to bring to all of you.
Second place Phoenixmon. Did y'all hear that? I don't know about y'all, but I absolutely have to see this deck. Editor, hit my music. Dash, will you please take it away?
Without further ado, I would love to antics. So, for those of you who don't know, I played in the Ultimate Cup yesterday. That was October 12th and took second place. This is my Phoenixmon list, and I have been playing this for a very long time. Now, I could honestly talk about this deck for a very long time. I could probably talk about it for about an hour. So I'm going to do my best to condense it down a little bit. I'm going to break it up. So first I'm going to talk about how the deck plays for people who maybe haven't played with it or against it. Because even though I'm playing in these tournaments, everybody keeps saying to me, oh, I've seen that deck, but I never got around to building it, and no one of my locals plays it. And then they proceed to lose because they have no idea what it does. So, Phoenixmon is essentially a mid-rangey, stacky deck where you're going to build your stack, ideally, and then you're going to unleash a big sort of burst of both interaction and lethality. It's similar to a lot of other stack decks. The thing that sets Phoenixmon apart is that its defenses are very potent against decks that have to delete you. It is probably the scariest deck if you are forced to delete your opponent's stuff to deal with it. Every single thing in the stack has on-deletion effects that are powerful, really powerful, and it is not uncommon to see your board get even wider after you lose your boss monster Phoenixmon X antibody. So starting with the rookies, both of these are some of the best rookies in the game. The card quality here is actually very high on average. This is a on-play searcher that picks up 2 cards, a red vaccine and a red tamer, and on deletion gains a memory. And this one is a start of main searcher. Unlike a lot of the other start of main rookies that gain memory on the start of main effect, this one searches for cards, which is actually quite interesting because it means that in very slow games against slower decks or against decks that are stumbling, right? Good example would be like a deck that goes turn 1 training with nothing and raising. You can promote this and use it multiple times to look for a lot of cards. So essentially this allows you to trash a bird archetype card, so anything in the middle here basically, and then you get to go look for any red card off the top. Now that's crazy because not only can you take out of archetype Digimon like Dino Rexmon or Gallantmon Crimson mode, but you can also take Gravity Crush off this search, which is nuts. Super powerful. The level 4s, I don't like level 4s in Digimon in general for stack builders. They are kind of the middle stepchild of levels, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Because their play cost is so high, they're very bad to play early. You'll often lose to someone who's drawn a decent opener. And they also cannot really be used to unbrick because you're probably not going to have the chance to evolve it into a 5, or if you do, you'll be spending so much memory on nothing that you already have lost the game. So we only run 7 here, instead opting for a much higher count of boosts and trainings. But they are still pretty good quality level 4s. This one is a blocker on the top half, and on the bottom half we have on deletion, play a 4-cost or lower red tamer. This one returns a bird from trash to hand when digivolving. So this one is more for the late game, and this one is more for the early mid game. This one I would cut from the deck. I would play a 4th copy of this one. However, its effect is when attacking, delete a 3k or less Digimon. This is primarily used to clear floodgates, but you don't need it for a reason we're about to discuss. Now the level 5s in this deck. These are some of the best level 5s and the most underrated Digimon in the Digimon TCG. They are very, very powerful and very, very versatile and can be used at almost every stage of the game to great effect. Whenever a card is good in the opener, good when you're behind, good when you're ahead, and good when you're at parity, that's an all-star. And these are both those types of cards. So Garudamon Ace, 4-cost, super premium. On play, or when digivolving, you can play a red tamer card from your hand. And then all turns, whenever a red tamer card is played, delete one of your opponent's Digimon with blocker. This is totally unrestricted, so you can kill level 7s with it if they have blocker. This card is amazing. If you are playing against a deck with blockers, you are automatically probably favored because you can clear away anything they've done by just simply hard playing a little 4-cost guy. You can really easily maintain turn while hard playing this card if you just take the time to set up a boost ahead of time or take the time to play Gravity Crush. um, Garudamon X Antibody. Oh, and also it bears repeating that playing the Tamer is really good. This deck gets a lot out of its Tamers. Garudamon X Antibody is the card in this deck. It is the strongest card and is the reason this deck functions. It honestly does so much, it's a little hard to tap into all of it. But, so on play and when Digivolving, return any red Digimon from trash to hand, so you can grab these guys, because they're all red. And then, if you have X Antibody or Garudamon in the sources, you can delete something with less DP. Now he's 8, he's pretty big, so he can delete a lot of problematic stuff. The two big things that you're deleting with this guy, though, are Floodgates and waiting ace targets. So a lot of times, decks will have very good aces against you. Aces are one of the biggest scary things for this deck, because this deck has to attack to accomplish a lot. And you do not want to get hit by certain aces. Vikemon Ace, big scary one. Zudomon Ace, big scary one, among others. So as long as you can pick up their scariest waiting ace target with these two cards, you're in business. Its next effect, it's got a lot of them, is your turn. Whenever a card returns from your trash to your hand, you can give one of your Digimon a rush. Now this means it triggers itself, so you can give itself rush when you play it out and return something, or when you evolve into it off of this guy that you hard played. In other words, this is a really easy way to access a rushing big Digimon, and you'll see we can quickly get it into one of the Megas too. So, these two cards, also incredible all-stars. They have a lot of effects. So Phoenixmon, when Digivolving, you can play a red Tamer. You're usually going to look to play Sora off of this. Or you can play a 5k DP or less red Digimon. Now, I want to call a little bit of special attention to that because it can play anything. It does not have to be in the archetypes. You can play Gaussmon off it, which is a Floodgate. I used to play Gotsumon here, and my thought for that was when I'm playing against Imperial, sometimes I'm going to want to open up like turn 1, Rookie and Raising play Training, and I'm going to want to then look to try to stop them from playing the game by going into the Gotsumon. But the problem with that is that this deck is very significantly affected by the Gotsumon, because we do a lot of playing by effect. We do it off of this card, and we do it off of Sora, and it's kind of how we close the game out. We even do it off Phoenixmon, so there's a lot. So I chose to play this card instead, and man, this card came up a lot. We'll get to that later, though. These are contact cards over here. And then Phoenixmon X Antibody. So this is where everything comes together. This card creates a gigantic cascade of effects. As long as you have the X Antibody or Phoenixmon source, all of your on-deletions also become end of attacks, so you get to activate all of them. And this is particularly dangerous for these two and the egg. So this one says play an 11k DP or less bird from your hand, and then delete one of your opponent's Digimon with DP less than or equal to what was played. So you almost always are going to want to play one of the 5s or the 6. This has a powerful on-play effect that if your opponent has 4 or more security, you can trash their top security. So the stock standard opening with this deck is to build the usual stack up to the Phoenix X, swing with it, and activate on deletions. Start by playing out this. Delete one of their 11k DP or less things, and then trash their top security. Then you move down the stack to this. Trash top again. His inheritable is trash top security. Can you believe this card is so nuts? And then you can get a whole bunch of value on top of that by gaining memory back with the lower effects and playing free stuff. So the big thing here is that that's your big lethal push. But like a lot of other decks, right, where maybe you have a when Digivolving effect, you now have put them in a situation where they have to react to you. They have one turn to do something about this, and they better not delete it, because if they do, you will get to do it all again. And you probably will win the game because of all the buyback stuff and ensuring that you have plays to make off of it. So the big scary thing about this is that this deck has a lot of gas in the tank. You will really not brick too often. It is very consistent. You can open up one of two ways. A very standard stack building opener where you would do a lot of searching, evolving and raising, playing boosts. Or you can open up hard play Garudamon Ace and play out Sora, who is your Mem Tamer. Because this is a Mem Tamer, you are now play enabled to go right into one of your Megas next turn.
That's really strong.
So that's the general plan. Sorry, go on, Antics.
I was just saying that's really strong. I didn't even think of that. Like just turn 2 being in your Mega that quickly.
Yep, and that is one of the main things we'd like to do. The two best openers with this deck are like this plus a boost, or this plus hard play this plus hard play this. Both of these super strong. Let's talk a little bit about more in depth what this deck does. So the thing about this deck is that it only has a few weaknesses, and that's why it has such a good matchup spread. However, at the moment, it actually has a couple of its worst matchups are the strongest decks. The big thing is Imperial. Imperial is very bad. You essentially need for them to not understand what you are doing, or you need for them to brick. It is not easy for this deck to OTK, though it is possible. And against Imperial, if you do not kill them, they will put out a card that will just stop you from playing the game. So potentially they will rip your Phoenixmon X sources so that it's neutered, and then they will proceed to stun it so that you cannot attack with it. Stun it suspended, I mean with Pildramon. Or they will just represent Dragon Mode, and then they will ace you and wreck your stack when you try to attack and get your effects. Both of these are typically game lost situations. And in my experience, I couldn't actually find a great way around this. So my answer was to choose not to find a way around it. This format, everybody's trying to beat Imperial. They really do not like playing against Imperial, and I don't blame them. It is a very simple, straightforward deck. It does not require a whole ton of input from the pilot or the opponent. Typically, it just spins its wheels and wins or doesn't. And because of that, a lot of people are trying to beat it because they know a lot of people are going to be playing it. It's so strong, so prevalent. This deck is really good against the decks that beat Imperial because those decks are all putting up really tanky defenses, immaculate stuff, big unaffected blockers, all sorts of stuff. A great example would be Magnamon X Antibody, right? Against Imperial, you put up your Magnamon, he's unaffected, they can't Pildramon lock it, so now you have some defense. Well, if you do that against this deck, this card is quite nasty because we can just go put a level 4 in play, and then our Magnamon X opponent is going to be forced to either re-enable their protection, which if they do it, we can keep waiting. We have all day. They're not hitting us, we don't care. Or if they don't re-enable their protection and swing unprotected, you could ace into Garudamon and blow up their Magnamon. Sometimes other decks like Mother Shota Control, Security Control, Dexter Gorma, another great example. All these decks are kind of slow and plodding. They get going like later on. They're looking to control your board, delete your stuff. And so against those decks, we have a very potent raising game plan where we will just draw a bunch of cards, wait in raising, and then we'll go into Phoenixmon X. You will use the Garuda X to blow up any waiting ace targets, and then you will go ahead and use this. And it doesn't matter if they kill it or not, because you are going to be getting so much value, you will overwhelm them typically. That is the big thing about this deck. This deck is practically just free against control. You really cannot lose. You trash so much security, you have so much aggression, so much lethal swings. So let's talk a little bit about the late game for this deck. So I talked about the early game. You go into Phoenixmon X, do 2 trashes, and put out a whole bunch of stuff. Once you've done that, you now have like some Soras and Akihos in play, and you can convert these into extra attacks very easily. Sora, whenever you return a Digimon from your trash to the hand, you have the opportunity to activate Sora. You can return her to your hand, and you can play a bird based on the number of security your opponent has. So you're rewarded for damaging your opponent early. The threshold you really want to get them to is 3 security, because at 3 security, you can start playing Garudamon Ace. And that is very notable, because Garudamon Ace can immediately replay the same Sora that you just picked up. That's also another reason why we play 4 of this card instead of the other Garudamons. I'm sure some people who've tried this deck might have that question. This card is just more powerful. It can play Sora, it can delete blockers, it's very versatile. But yeah, so once you've gotten to that point, you have a bit of a loop established, right? As long as you have these 2 cards and this, you can kind of just keep spewing them out, and you can get like 4 of them into play. You can typically end on like 3 of these, and then like 2 of these with a Garuda X on top, which will allow you to clear the way really well. You can get rid of any of those waiting aces I mentioned earlier, and then you can attack with all of them. Now, Gravity Crush enables us to do this from less memory than our opponents expects. Gravity Crush is a little bit broken in this deck. A lot of decks, when they're playing this card, they're looking to do it as part of their main plan. It's going to be some sort of big combo. They're going to wait for the late game and play Mervamon, right? And then they'll have 3 rushers. We can use this card at almost all stages of the game. There's 3 main ways that we use this card. The first one is to go a turn early. A lot of times, you will have like these back and forth choke wars. Your opponent's very afraid of you going with this card before you're ready, so they're going to set you to one way you only have like maybe a level 3 in raising and a boost, right? Let's say you have that set up exactly, right? Well, suddenly I promote my 3, I training into my level 4, I Gravity Crush, I Protoform into my level 5, and then I swing Phoenix X, or Evolve Phoenix X and Blitz with it. And suddenly the game explodes, right? We do a whole ton of damage, put a whole bunch of stuff out, and they have to answer it that turn, or the game will end because we'll do it all again next turn, right? This is a super must-answer card. The other thing you can do with Gravity Crush is to play it in a position where you cannot access Garudamon Ace, right? You need more memory. So you set at 3 by Sora, or your opponent chokes you at 2. Boom. Gravity Crush, play this, and you can do whatever you want from there, honestly. You can gain so much memory. Wings of Love is a similar card to Gravity Crush, however, it is far less versatile because you cannot really use it effectively in the opening play. You can only use it in the late game, whereas Gravity Crush is good in both the development to go a turn early, as I mentioned, and in the late game to set up Garudamon Ace hard plays and just extend big combos. And the third thing that we do with Gravity Crush is insurance. A lot of decks right now will gain random memory. Some random examples are Hokuto, Amanokawa, and Control. Security bombs like Hammer Spark and Ice Wall, and Analog Youth. A lot of decks will set these up as their defense to try to not die to you because you're going to blow up all their stuff and their security. And you'll say, okay, I'll go to 2 more mem, and you will not be living. So let's move on to the tech cards just a little bit here before I discuss some more things about the meta. Um, I got some funny ones. This was really, really good, unexpectedly. So like I said, I put this in because I was looking for a card to be good against Imperial because this deck's Imperial matchup is atrocious. And I had got to one initially to cut them off of the Davis and Ken, but it was hurting myself too much, so I took it out. This card was. I did not play against too much Imperial, only one Imperial, and I beat him. He kind of drew mediocre, and I drew really well. But this card was so good against everything else that it was actually just worth it. There were so many times where I was in training wars with my opponent, right? We're both sitting and raising. They've got like a Dorumon, I've got like a Biomon, and we're both like training boost tamer. And then eventually it comes time to like go, and I'll evolve up to Phoenixmon, and then I'll play this out. And they're like, oh. And now I get to do my thing, and they are not a play enabled. They cannot keep turn while evolving into their floor, so the game kind of just ends for them right there. Yeah, it's really good. Every deck is playing trainings that isn't like an archetype deck that can't run them, so you will not see too little use out of it. I'm not sure if it came up against Imperial, but it does technically actually have a lot of stuff it does against them too. So they have HPD, they have Promo Vmon, and they have Primogenitor, everyone's favorite card. So it does stop all 3 of those. These 2 cards. All right, let's talk about the Dynarexmon in the room. So Dynarexmon was my Imperial Tech card. I think that if you're running tech cards for a really bad matchup where you have to see the tech card to win, you probably should run 2 because the odds that you see you're one of in time is honestly not that great. But what does this card do exactly? Well, it says all turns, while your opponent has 1 or more memory, they can't play Digimon with 6 KDP or less. Every single champion and rookie in most decks is 6 KDP or less. So typically it just says they can't play level 3s or 4s. Against Imperial, if you give them 3 memory and you have this card, there is nothing they can do without options to get out of that scenario, except for hard evolving the Paildramon and sacking all their good effects, right? Now, them hard evolving the Paildramon is very good for us. It's for a lot of reasons, right? So if they hard evolve the Paildramon, they don't get to strip our sources with Davis and Ken. They don't get to stun our board with the Paildramon, and they don't get to have a huge source stack to represent Fighter Mode Ace with, which is a very scary card for us. It's an Ace that they can represent off another 6. So we can't deal with it with Garudamon X, which is one reason that matchup is so bad. But this card just says, nope, nope, no DNA plays anymore. You're going to evolve Paildramon now. It's very entertaining, honestly, and it did not come up at all today. I would recommend cutting it and just leaning more into the main game plan. I did test a lot of games against friends with this card who play Imperial, and when it comes up, it is amazing, and they cannot do anything. But I still think it's not worth it, to be honest. Now, Gallimon Crimson Mode Ace is a different story. I would consider actually cutting this maybe for the second copy of this. This card is really good in this deck. Very, very good. We are often leaving a 6 in play that has attack and is just kind of sitting there. And our opponent, a lot of times, especially if they're playing blue, instead of answering it, they're going to neuter it. They're going to stun it, remove the sources, something to this effect. This card really punishes them for trying to go down that route. It's also very good in push for lethal wars, which you do get into sometimes if both you and your opponent have a good draw. So I played against EXSmon yesterday, and we had a very close game where he went into A very tight line that locked down my board with Quartzmon and had some defenses, and I only had one memory. I had no Tamer, so I had no way to do a play, basically. But I had this card, and he swung with his 15k Quartzmon, and the game ends because it dies, and I get to kill him on the crackback. I also used this card to win against Dex Dorugoramon. Um, that matchup, by the way, is very, very free for birds, I would say. It does require you to play a little bit intelligently, but you have a lot of interaction that lines up very well with them. Delete blocker, delete their little thing. Not uncommon to see me go like delete the level 4 blocker and then delete it again with this, or delete the big blocker and then delete it again with this or something. But against them, I also was in a situation where they absolutely had to connect a collision attack against me to accomplish something. And they did not have Dex Doru Greymon. They only had Dex Doru Goramon and Trash. So rather than letting the attack happen, I just aced into this and blew up all their stuff, everything they had, and they had no recourse from there. So, yes. As far as matchups went for me, and this is why this was such a successful run for me, is I only had to play against blue decks twice, and one of those was one of my losses. I played against a bunch of controls, so about 3 decks, one Mother Shoto deck, one Leviamon deck, Eosmon, and then we played against one Imperial. We beat him. He drew kind of poorly, and we drew very well. And we played against one Mirage Galaxy player in the penultimate round. That was my loss. That is a very bad matchup because he has Hexablaumon, a card which is extremely difficult for this to deal with. Funny enough, if they weren't able to get so many sources, it would be a little bit more doable. But in Mirage Galaxy, the Hexablaumon player can go up to maybe like 6 or 7 sources. Anyway, I don't want to get too nitty-gritty into matchups, but that was how we lost the one game, was he just went into Hexablaumon on turn 2 both games, and I had no recourse. This is the only way out of that situation, I think. So I would maybe consider this at 2, because it deals with a lot of things that you aren't expecting to have to deal with. Yeah. All right, so that's about it for the matchup analysis. Like you're going to be very favored against decks that have to fight for board with you because you're just way better at it with these enormous landmines that are waiting to blow up your opponent's entire security and play out like 3 bodies. Let's talk a little bit about these Tamers, right? Because I think this is the last thing I haven't come to. Also, there's XMLA Protoform here. This card is not too like there's not too much to talk about with this. I think in this deck, if you played with this card before, you know what it does. You're going to be evolving into these 2 cards with it. It's about what you'd expect. You do want to use it to get an extra source sometimes against certain things like Vikemon Ace. But yeah, mainly you're just doing the thing that you might expect with this. So the Tamers. Akiho Rindo is a Tamer which searches for a red vaccine. Now, this search is actually pretty notable, because for one thing, it can unbrick you and helps with this deck's immense consistency. This deck is very consistent. So you can play it, keep it in your opening hand to look for like a missing rookie. A lot of times you'll have a hand that's like, boost, Akiho, and then 4, 5, 6. And that's a good hand, because you have 10 level 3s, you're really likely to find one. And Akiho is going to help you get there. But as played when part of the combo, a lot of times you'll be in the opposite scenario, right? You'll have the 3 and the 4 and the 5, but you maybe are missing a 6 or Garuda X, and it's really important to find this card. So what you can do is use Garuda Ace to play this out, and then go find the missing pieces, which is super, super nifty and helpful. The other thing this card does is extend your lethality. When you play a bird by effect, you can tap it to give it rush. And you have a lot of ways to play birds by effect. You often give it something rush off of this Phoenixmon, usually like a Searcher Biomon to help me find more Garuda X's. You can give it to the thing you play off Phoenix X, another very common application. You don't usually want to use this on Garudamon X, because Garudamon X, usually you want to give it self-rush with its own effect. If you're playing this deck, a lot of times you'll have these weird turns where you have the ability to give 3 or 4 things rush, and you need to produce like 5 attacks to get through your opponent's defenses. I recommend that when you're looping these back and forth with Garuda Ace and Sora, you always try to give it self-rush. It will decomplicate things for you, and it is almost always correct. And then Sora. So this is a mem setter, which is very nice. We have a 4 of mem setter that doesn't need to ever tap for anything. And the card lets you return itself. So not only can this card be used to do crazy plays by hard playing Garudamon Ace, but sometimes if you have this and nothing else, and your opponent is at like, 3 security and you're at 3 mem and you have no Grav Crush, you can just promote a new rookie, swing it, and get the egg effect, which returns a bird from trash to hand. trigger your Sora, and then start a giant chain of events because you will have the level 5 in play for free at that point, which means you have all the memory you need to go into one of these guys. All right. I think I've said my piece here for the most part.
All right. So I have to just thank you first off because I thought this was a very unique way to do a deck profile, especially for a deck that most people probably don't know what it does or what its game plan is or what it's trying to achieve, right? So having the list already laid out for maybe the people who have played the deck and know how to play, they're like, okay, cool, I see it. But for everyone else who is like me, I had no idea about anything that it does besides Garudamon Ace and Crimson Mode Ace. So it was very cool how comprehensive your explanation was. So thank you for that. Also, I just like to say congratulations again. If you guys don't know, Dash is one of my local homies. His tenure in this game competitively is incredible. He's won a regional, which I said on his last video. In his last video, he had top 16 with Jesmon, and now a second place with Red Vaccine. It's absolutely incredible. Before I let you go, are there any shout outs you'd like to give?
I'd like to give a little shout out to my teammate Kevin Ambler. He was the only person who built and tested this deck with me, I think. Um, no one else wanted to play it. Even he dropped it after a while and started playing blue decks. But shout out to all my local homies, especially a little shout out to some other friends, Conrad and Josh, who I did some playtesting with, and my friend Carl, who also did some playtesting with me. It's funny because I wasn't necessarily even playing Phoenix in a lot of these games against them, but they helped convince me to come back to Phoenix because I love this deck and it's honestly positioned so well if you can just dodge Imperial. So.
Well, it's also good to know Imperial isn't unwinnable for the deck. So, like, if someone's looking to pick up the deck and they just really grind out, the hours with it, they'd probably, do pretty well if they don't play too many of them, right?
Yeah, as long as you don't play too many. I'll just throw it out there that, when it comes to competitive card games, there are going to be these matchups which at first might seem unfavored, but in fact are actually very unfavored. I know some of you might have been expecting me to say, oh, they're actually kind of even. No, there's actually matchups which should be 90-10 if both players are competent. This is one of those matchups. Like, I got the 10% against that Imperial player, and I was incredibly lucky. It really helps that this is a rogue deck, kind of rogue. I feel like this is really a tier 1.5 deck, to be honest. But people will not know what you were doing all the time, which is very, very beneficial. They will not know what you are capable of. Yeah, which is a huge advantage because when you're playing against good players will always be calculating kind of like what they think you can do. And if they aren't actually capable of calculating that, you gain a big advantage because you know what they can do. You know what the decks can do. So,
All right.
Yep.
Cool. Well, all the shout outs set aside, I've already congratulated you a billion times, and I'll probably continue to congratulate you a billion times more.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
But we got to let these people go. With that being said, YouTube, Antics here with the swole on, the fro on, and I already gave you the explainer. I'm going to give it to you one more time. I am the Alpha Tamer. Peace.
The Alpha Tamer, baby.